Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.
Hello, this is Malcolm Robinson and you're listening to the Paranormal UK radio network, the UK's biggest paranormal network, and this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Hello, welcome to the show. Thank you for the intro, Malcolm. Very nice of you. Right, now I've got a few call-outs for this show, and it's Andrew Hockenheimer of Chatham, Ontario, Canada, Denise Parker, Basildon, Essex, UK, and Sandra Daroy of Amsterdam, Netherlands. Now, my guest today is another fellow Paranormal UK Radio Network host. His name's Neil Geddes Ward. He's a paranormal researcher, and he's got, as I just said, he's got his own show, which we won't go into too much about that. I don't think we won't talk about that. But anyway, now I'm going to introduce you now to Neil. Hello, Neil.
Hello, David. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, you're very welcome, my friend. And we're not going to talk about your show too much today. No, I'm only joking.
No.
Tell everyone what your show is. It's the Paranormal Peep Show on the same network, isn't it?
That's right. The Paranormal Peep Show. It's been going about over 2 years now. With I co-host that with Andy Chaplin, and Andy and I have known each other probably about 9 years now. And we actually met each other in a psychic workshop, and we ended up doing funny voices to each other, instead of getting on with the, going into, a mediumship or, whatever. We ended up doing little, character voices from TV. So we've kind of, it's quite nice actually to do a psychic workshop with another guy, because most of these psychic workshops I've ever attended, it's always been filled with women. And, I think more men are getting interested in it now. So it's nice to actually see also on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, a lot more shows coming on board, but also, equal amounts of men and women co-hosting.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that, as we progress down the road a little bit, that more men are being open to this type of thing, I think.
We've also just had Alison Dunlop join the network, haven't we?
Yes.
The ADX files, which is very good.
Yeah, that's great. I was interviewed by Alison about maybe 2 years ago now, and she had met me, although I don't recall, but I meet a lot of people, but she had met me up in Scotland where I did an event called Witchfest some years back. And I think she'd come up to my stall because I do artwork, and I think I'm presuming she must have bought a print or something off me and chatted to me, because when I had the interview with her a couple of years ago, she reminded me of this, and I couldn't recollect it, but as I say, when you travel about a lot doing events and things, you do meet a hell of a lot of people, so you can't always remember everything.
Yeah. But, I've been on a few of her shows. In fact, I think I was on one just a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, I should say. But,
oh gosh, the months are rolling back too quickly, aren't they?
I know, yeah. I can't believe I'm this far down the road, coming up to almost a year now with my shows. But
yeah, it's gone so quickly.
It's amazing, yeah. Because we did a little show together. Well, I say together a few months back, didn't we? With a host of hosts.
Yeah. That's right.
Which, we've kind of been planning to do this show for a while, haven't we? But we've just got round to it now.
Yeah, well, you're obviously getting all your guests in, which is great that you're managing to do that. It keeps you busy, though, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I've had some really good shows, actually. It seems to be amazing to me, quite popular,
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a great thing because you have the honour and the privilege, like me and Andy do, of interviewing some great, interesting people. And you hear a lot of things that the average person on the street wouldn't get to ask those questions. So that's the honour of doing these productions,
Absolutely.
I think.
I mean, that's what I always say. I mean, I'm on a learning curve as much as anyone else is, and I like to learn from these shows as much as anyone,
Yes,
I think that's what we all do it for, really. I mean, to pass information on and learn, you know.
Absolutely.
I don't think any of us are experts in any. I'll say this on every show. None of us are experts in anything, really. We're just sort of trying to just add a little bit more to the puzzle as we go along.
Well, that's right. We're all learning, and we learn from each other. And as each year goes past, there's always something else to sort of grasp and try and understand, whether it's in the field of quantum physics or you know.
Go into that.
Yeah, I know. The revelations of aliens and ET's visiting us and things coming out of into the public arena a little bit more, you know. So it's a forever unfolding piece of string, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as far as your interests go, I mean, I know you do a lot of visionary artwork and things like that, don't you? So I don't know if you want to explain what that is to our listeners all over the world.
Okay, well, I mean, if I roll back the years right back to when I was a child, I was always curious about things. And my dad was a a technical illustrator. And as you worked in the aviation industry, you'd perhaps understand this quite well. He used, obviously before we had computers doing all this sort of thing, he was a technical illustrator with a drawing board. And he used to work for a company that made ejection seats for aircraft.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so his job was literally like a Haynes manual for a car, where you have to take a car apart. He was doing a similar thing for technicians and engineers to how to remove an ejection seat or how to put one in an aircraft. Because obviously the company would make these ejection seats for all sorts of different aircraft, but they had to be presumably put in, you know, slightly different for each aircraft, depending on what they were.
Yeah, sure.
And so my dad had to sort of draw the nuts and bolts on these things, where to put this and where to put that. And so I got my artistic skills from him. And all my brothers, I've got 4 brothers, 5 boys, no sisters. We all ended up, to a certain degree, able to draw and paint, but I was the only one that went on to do it. And I also had a side interest where I was very curious about where was I before I was born. I said this to my mum as a youngster, and she said, well, you weren't here, you never existed. And I thought, well, I must have. Even though I couldn't provide an answer, it sort of set me on a quest, really, because I used to love watching things like Star Trek on the TV, and, you know, getting a bit older, the other science fiction shows like the Jerry Anderson stuff like UFO, and that intrigued me, you know, is there life on other planets? And I used to read the Reader's Digest magazines about people's experiences of dying in an operating theatre and then floating out of their body.
Oh, yeah.
The near-death experiences, yeah. And that just kept the ball rolling. My curiosity got the better of me. And as I got older, I got into people like Doris Stokes and Medium and anything that I could get my hands on. Of course, we didn't have the internet in those days, so it was down the library for most of us, wasn't it? So, you know, you got the odd book here and there, the Paranormal or maybe a Jenny Randall's book or something like that, you know. So you got what knowledge you could from there. And I think obviously I've gone on now, and I've ended up doing artwork for books and doing my own prints and things like that. And you call it visionary artwork, and yes, I would call it visionary artwork as well. But I did a lot of artwork for the pagan scene, because the lady I was married to was more into paganism than I was, and that's where I met Alison, as I mentioned.
That's right.
I
know she's very much into paganism and everything, isn't she?
That's right. Yeah. So she came to an event called Witch Fest, and that's where she met me for the first time a few years back. And
you can't remember.
Although I can't remember, but maybe hypnosis and regression might work in that. But yeah, so I basically got very, very much interested into the whole thing. I learned about witches, witchcraft, ghosts, spirits, fairies, because I worked on a fairy book some years ago called Fairycraft. And I ended up doing a little deal with people, because I used to obviously go to these events and I'd have to pay money for a stall, but I was always aware that they needed speakers for their events. So I would say to them, how about if I do a free talk for you and you give me a free stall? And they'd always say, oh, yes, please. So really, I found that as I did a talk on maybe fairies and a few ghostly experiences or whatever, people would then come up to me and tell me their personal stories that they wouldn't really want to tell everybody else, really. So it's kind of snowballed from that, really, about the whole gamut of knowledge that I've so far attained in this area of my research where people have told me their own personal stories.
Yeah, well, I suppose they felt comfortable telling you because you've just been telling your own stories. So,
yeah. And people obviously, when they go to these events, whether it's a UFO conference, a ghost hunting thing, or a meditation group, they feel more of a kind of comfortable because there's other people like them at these events too. Whereas where they might be going to work or something, they don't want to talk about that sort of thing because people might laugh at them or something. They feel more relaxed and interested, and they can sit around and have a coffee with people that they may not know very well, but they're all going to talk on that level of whether it's ghostly encounters or a UFO or whatever it may be. They feel much more settled. So like you said, they're going to be more happy to talk to me because I've just been talking about that whole subject anyway.
I mean, it's not just you mentioned about fairies. I think we having a little chat before the show. I'm not quite sure about how I feel about the idea of fairies and things. I mean, I've heard a few stories and they sound kind of believable, but do I know? What's your opinion of them?
Well, I've met many people that have seen some strange things. We call them fairies, and the legends call them, different regions of the world have different names for them, really, like in the same way you might talk about the Sasquatch in America. They call it the Yowie in Australia, or something else in another part of the world. So with fairies, like for instance, the Native American people have similar tales of small beings, and they call them the little people of the hills or something like that. But I've met people that have claimed to have seen them, in one form or another. There was, part of the research we did for our book Fairycraft, we actually got a DVD off of Amazon, some years ago, but I believe you can now get it on YouTube, by a Canadian filmmaker called John Walker. And in the film, he goes and meets various people that have had these fairy encounters in different areas of the world, like Canada, Ireland, Scotland possibly. And they all have very interesting stories to tell. There was one chap he met that was, I think he was a Glaswegian construction worker. I can't remember his name now, but he had gone to Southern Ireland for a little holiday, and I think he was sort of like just backpacking by himself or something. And he said in the film that he heard this strange, really weird music coming from somewhere, but he couldn't quite track where it was coming from. So it just finished raining, so he decided to sit down, and he saw this lovely rainbow appearing over the valley, and it was forming a lovely scene out in front of me. He thought, wow, what a beautiful view that is. And he said that whilst he was sitting down there was something in his peripheral vision down by his feet, but he didn't want to take his eyes off this wonderful view unfolding before him, and yet he could still see this annoying thing, whatever it was, moving down by his feet.
He thought it was annoying, did he?
Yeah, he was annoyed by it.
I suppose he thought it was an insect or something, did he?
Yeah, well, he wasn't quite sure what to make of it. So he looked down, and then what he saw wasn't an insect. He said it was a small, what was it? I think it was a woman. He said a small woman who was about 1 foot high. Wow. She had leathery looking skin, like a pointy sort of hat. And he said that she had what appeared to him like old style sheep shears. And he said that she appeared to be cutting round the sole of his shoe. And he said, now this is where it gets really weird, and I always tell everybody in the audience at this point to strap in, because it's going to be a rough ride. What he said that where she was cutting around the sole of his shoe, and where his shadow from his body extended across the ground, he said at the other end of the end of his shadow was the male equivalent of this woman, like her husband, if you like, and this is where it gets bizarre, he was rolling up his shadow like paper. What? Yeah, exactly. It defies all logical explanations or reasoning or physics as we understand it, but he was rolling the shadow up like Peter paper, and someone said to me once, oh, that sounds like Peter Pan. And I said, yeah, you're right. And he said, I dread to think what would have happened to me if I hadn't looked down. What would have happened to him in some way? Was his soul taken, or, energy sucked out of him like a vampire in some way? And then when he said he didn't know what to think, and so the only thing he could do was shout, "Oi!" like that. And he said that they looked at each other in surprise as if saying, oh my God, he can see us. And they went woof and just vanished. That was that.
Wow, that's one of the weirdest stories I think I've ever heard.
I know.
in some ways, I mean, UFOs sound quite normal compared to that.
Right. Yeah. That's right. You can tap a UFO on the side or something, but this is completely off the scale. But this was an ordinary guy. It wasn't some sort of Glastonbury hippie type person. It was an ordinary construction worker. And, he had that really strange experience.
And the fact that they disappeared as he sort of noticed them as we, that is kind of, I mean, I wonder if they were kind of interdimensional beings rather than, they would be, wouldn't they, I presume?
Well, it appears to be that way, doesn't it? The fact that they're first of all, they're trying to take something that you physically can't roll up in our world, but somehow there seem to be...
Yeah, that's strange.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering aloud now, this is only speculation, I keep hearing these things called shadow people. I don't know if there was a connection between that kind of thing and this situation here, that shadows can somehow be moved or taken around or moved in some way. It is a very bizarre thing to comprehend, though.
Or maybe they were actually protecting him from a shadow being or something, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe they were taking that shadow being away from him or something, you know.
Maybe they're trying to sell the shadow onto the shadow being. Yeah. For a pot of gold.
Well, that's a weird one.
And there was another story in that DVD. As I say again, you can find it on YouTube. It's called The Fairy Faith by John Walker, for anyone that wants to track it down. And in this particular instance, he goes to Canada, and he meets a lady and her daughter, and they take him to a lake somewhere in Canada. Don't ask me where. And basically, she recounts a story that happened, I think it was around 1974, 75, something like that, where the lady, the daughter that was with her, was obviously a very young girl at the time, and she had taken her kids for a little afternoon picnic and a paddle by the lake. And I think she had a few little ones with her, by the sounds of it, and she said that she was just paddling there with the kids with their, shoes and socks off in the lake. And the mother could hear, again, some strange music coming from somewhere. And again, she couldn't quite pinpoint where it was, but it gave her the chills, and she didn't quite like it. It was a sort of weird singing, she said. And so she decided that was it. I've got to get out of here. So she just said to her kids, right, get in the car. And they were sort of complaining, why? Why do we have to suddenly go? And she just said frantically, get in the car. And so she got all her kids in the car. And she just said to her oldest daughter, and this is the girl that was with her in the film, she said, don't look out the window. And of course, this girl says, in the film, she goes, I remember my mum saying, don't look out the window, but I just couldn't resist. I had to look. And she says, as the car drove away, she looked out the window from where she was sitting, and she said she saw this kind of pathway that went into the woods, but she said she saw these group of small beings, maybe a foot high, I'm only guessing that now, and they're all linked hands, holding hands and kind of dancing, and she actually recreates this little dance in the film to kind of show you what they were doing, but they were dancing down the pathway towards them, and this is where presumably that singing was coming from, but it obviously unnerved the mother so much that she had that protective instinct kicked in, and she wouldn't have to get out of there. So, these fairy beings, or whatever they are, often seem to be associated with this weird, strange music.
That is interesting. I mean, of course, then if anyone tells you not to do something, you're going to do it, aren't you, anyway?
Absolutely, especially as a kid. The curiosity killed the cat, I mean, it's a good job they're in that car, they could get away quick, Had they been, I mean, maybe that music is something to do with, puts you in a kind of a trancey spell, state of, like the guy there that was, with this shadow situation, he was off literally with the fairies looking at the rainbow, and he was a bit sort of taken away with that and distracted, and maybe the music acts as a sort of a distraction for you, rather like a kind of sweet kind of honey scent for an insect that then gets trapped by the Venus flytrap or something.
Yeah, or maybe it's something to do with the vibration plane of the dimensional stuff as well. It's because we do hear that the different tones can make different effects, and I don't know. I mean, I'm only sort of grabbing at straws, really. I don't know. It's just weird. Yeah.
It is incredibly weird. I mean, I remember again, still on this subject a little bit, but we can go on to other stuff in a minute. But this was a very, very interesting one, because I was actually going on holiday to Spain. After this book, Fairycraft that we wrote, we actually went on a holiday to Spain. My two kids, they're grown up now, but they were young at the time, and we were heading off to Spain, and one of the last people to get on the plane was, I thought he was a Spanish guy because he had sort of dark skin. When he sat next to me, he got chatting to me, and he said, "Oh, I come from Persia." He says, "You would know that as Iran," but he said, "I prefer to call it Persia," he said. I went, "Oh, right, okay." So it was a 2-hour flight or something from Luton Airport. And so we got chatting about all sorts of things, and he said that he was an architect going out to Spain to check on the properties that he was working on. And he asked what I did, and I said, well, at the time I ran a gallery up in the Orkney Islands, so I was telling him all about the fairy gallery and the fairy artwork that I did. And I happened to have some pictures of the artwork on my camera, so I showed him a few bits of the artwork. And so I then went on to tell him some of these stories that I've just related there from this John Walker documentary film. And he opened up a little bit, again, because I think he felt comfortable to say these things, and I think he felt that he wanted to say these things to at least someone that wouldn't laugh at him. So he said that when he was a young man, he was conscripted into the army back in Persia or Iran, and he said he was patrolling the streets at night with another army buddy, and he said a sandstorm kicked up, which was typical in that area apparently. And so, rather than just walk around the streets with the sandstorm blowing in their eyes and everything, they said, let's seek shelter. And the only place that they could get into was a mosque. So they went into this mosque, and no one was around. It was all dark and quiet. And they took off their shoes, as you have to do in a mosque. And I'll call him Hussein, because he didn't want his name revealed. But he said to his mate, he said, right, you go to sleep for an hour. I'll keep a watch on the situation. And after an hour, I'll wake you up, and then I'll have a sleep. So that was the arrangement they had, and his mate went to sleep. Hussein sat next to him, but with his back against the wall, and he had his gun with him. And he said that no matter how hard he tried, he kept nodding off to sleep. And he thought, I must stay awake, and then bang, he'd nod off to sleep again, he'd wake up and go, oh, I must stay awake. And he said on the third time, he drifted off to sleep, and then, yeah, I must stay awake, and he woke up. And this time, on the third time that he woke up, he said that he noticed there was a lady crouched down, looking at his feet, where his feet were. She was looking at his feet, and there was a young girl, he thought she was maybe about 12, looking at his friend's feet as well. And he thought, where have these people come from? I don't remember them coming in. And he thought, what on earth are they doing? And this woman and the young girl were just staring at his friend's feet. And so he thought, I don't like this. And he said, he started to try and wake his friend up by pressing his elbow onto the chest of his friend, and his friend wouldn't wake up no matter how hard he pressed his elbow into his chest. And so he thought, I don't like this, I'm going to get out of here. So he said he started to wrap the strap of the gun around his arm, so he said that it wouldn't swing as he ran away. And yet he was the guy with the gun. This is the thing that always made me laugh. And he said that as he did that, it must have kind of alerted this lady to look up, because he said that she suddenly looked at him straight in the eye, and he said, as soon as I made eye contact with this woman, I just knew that she wasn't from this world. She was another being entirely. He said at that point, the lady stood up, and the young girl stood up as well, and they turned and walked away. And he said as they walked away, he noticed they both had cloven hoofed feet. And then they just vanished into the wall.
Oh, wow.
And when he told me that, I did have a shiver that ran up my spine, I must admit. It was a pretty scary one, that one. Yeah. And, yeah.
I'll tell you what I find strange, the fact that he came to find, and he sat next to you. Now, was he actually guided, do you think, from the other, something on the other side that made that he needed to offload that story to somebody?
It's quite possible. It was almost as if he was late for the plane, because he got in last. Like everybody else.
You know what I'm getting to, don't you? I mean, sometimes
I'm
sure that things are guided from the other side, into certain things, so you meet certain people at certain times,
Yeah, and this story has to get out into the public, and I'm that conduit, if you like, to get it out through you and other people. But it also explains the other interesting side of it is the fact that they were curious about his feet.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say about the feet again. Because, because the other one was interested in the feet, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's from two people from opposite sides of the world, basically, telling the story about fairies and feet.
Yeah. And, and he was an architect, again, a level-headed guy. He was a soldier at the time, probably about 18 or 19, I'd imagine. And, they were curious about the human feet, because obviously in their world, they had cloven hoof feet. And then you think about it a bit more and you think, well, hang on, we've got all these legends of fawn people, haven't we? And cloven hoof beings and stuff. And you're thinking, maybe that's something behind the legends then, after all.
Yeah, well, certainly in the old Greek myths, and there's a lot of that, isn't there?
Again, out in the Middle East a little bit. So, I mean, it's possible that in those regions, maybe those beings can enter that part of the world easily, but they can't do that sort of thing here, whereas we get the other types of fairies. Like, we have different races of people around the world. Maybe there's different races of fairy beings, which, I understand there is anyway. So maybe they frequent that part of the world and others frequent this part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there would be different races. They wouldn't all be the same, would there? Yeah, no. It's a really interesting. I might have to look a bit deeper into that. What your book is? It still available on Amazon?
Fairycraft.
I might have to try and get hold of a copy of that.
I'll send you a link for it. Yeah. You could probably still get it, or maybe eBay as well.
Yeah, I'll put it on my Paranormal Dimensions page as well, in case anyone else out there wants to try and find it. But,
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, I as I say, I'm not really an expert on fairies, but, I've kind of heard enough stories to kind of think, well, there must be something to this.
Well, it's a bit like, there's the Bigfoot and Sasquatch and Loch Ness Monster. There's always these stories that have always been there, haven't there? And you think, well, there's got to be some sort of truth in it.
But that's right. That's right. I mean, more often than not, it's just ordinary people having the most strangest of encounters, I mean, I do get a lot of people tell me, some weird stuff after, I mean, when I did the Probe conference a few years ago, I did my talk Encounters with Fairies, Ghosts and Spirits there to about 200 people at the Probe conference. And again, you get about 10 people come up to you, forming a queue to say, I want to tell you a story. And so you listen politely and, one after another tells you a story. And now and again you hear a gem of a story. And this particular lady came up to me and she said, I'm so glad you told the story about the man that saw the cloven-hoofed people, the story I've just related, because she said that when she was in hospital, she had given birth to a stillborn baby, and obviously she was pretty distraught about the whole thing, as you can imagine. She said that she was put in this like a recovery room with the baby that was dead in a cot next to her, so that she could try, I suppose, and come to some sort of terms with it. And she said it was very sad. She sat there crying, thinking, how on earth can I be strong for my family, my husband, when I've just given birth to a dead baby and I can't even sort of, come to terms with it myself, And she said at that point, somehow the door opened and she was looking down at the ground, I suppose, because she said it just caught her eye. She said 5 or 6 small centaur beings came into the room. So we're talking people that have got human bodies, but again, cloven-hoofed feet, like the body of a horse, if you like, in this particular case. And she said they weren't pretty. These were all really ugly beings. And she said 2 of them went over and looked at the dead baby in the cot, and the others just came up and stared at her, and looked at her in the face. And she didn't say exactly how long they stayed for or what else they did, but then she said they went away. Now, I don't know how they went away. She didn't explain that part of it, but she just wanted to tell me that because she said the story I've made kind of then confirmed her own experience in the hospital with these centaur beings. Again, very bizarre.
Definitely. Well, I mean, how do you explain that? I mean, I suppose some people would put it down that she might have been put on some sort of a tranquilizing drug or something, And,
that's it. That's it. You can't prove these stories, can you? And there's always going to be the skeptics that say, oh, well, I won't believe it unless it's countersigned by 5 different physicists and, everything like that. But unfortunately, when you have these experiences, you don't have 5 physicists going around there with you to witness it with you.
Sure.
And you can't often reproduce these things in a laboratory for them because a lot of these things happen not under laboratory conditions. A lot of this stuff happens out in the field where there's no laboratory microscope or recorder of any sort for it to happen. It seems to be such a rare natural phenomena, like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. How can you do it?
Yeah. Yeah. I know you do local chats, don't you, in a pub? I made it to one once.
You did? Yes, you did. You came and saw David Caton, if I recollect.
David Caton and Andrew Johnson, I believe, was there as well.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
I'll have to try and get there again one day. It's
Yeah, the High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group. I've been running that about sort of 6 years, I think, now, and I try and get different speakers. Philip Kinsella's done a talk there.
I like Philip's a good friend. Yeah.
Lovely people, lovely people. And, so we get different people down to do a talk once a month and, cover their petrol and a few drinks and things and maybe feed them up a little bit. And, have some, a lot of people really enjoy it and, find it of interest. And, I've done my own talks there, of course, sometimes as well. Where was I going? I was going to tell another. Oh yeah, I'll tell you this ghostly story because that's becoming, it's like October time. And it's always Halloween. Yeah. It's always time for the ghosties. And, obviously I mentioned that I was into developing mediumship, some years ago. I still do it a little bit, but before that I was doing tarot card readings for people. And, most of the time people used to come to me, but on one particular occasion, this lady phoned me and she said, "Oh, I don't drive. Can you come to me?" And I said, "Well, where do you live?" And she sort of said the town that she lived in. And I thought, well, it's not that far. And I thought, I don't really want to do it, but I'll do it. So I felt sorry for her, so I said, all right, I'll come to you. So, I drove over to her place and she lived in a small bungalow and she was an elderly lady and, I did the tarot card reading in about 40 minutes or something or whatever it might have taken. And she said, "That's very, very accurate." I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And, she said, "But there's one thing you haven't mentioned." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And she said, "Well, you never mentioned my husband." And I said, well, look, I said, I would mention your husband if I felt him around. And she goes, "Well, let me show you something." And, because she lived in a bungalow, her bedroom was on the ground floor. And she said, "In this bedroom here, my husband spent the last year of his life in this bed. And he was so seriously ill that he had to have an oxygen machine to breathe with. One of those tanks with a mask." And, she said that one day she was puffing up his pillows for him, trying to help him to make him more comfortable. And so he was leaning forward while she was adjusting the pillows for him. And he said, "Oh, I feel so ill. I want to die. I just want to die." And she said, with that, he actually died. And he actually just literally died in her arms. And so she laid him back on the bed and she said she saw this vaporous mist come out of his chest, rise up towards the ceiling and go over into the corner of the room and go into where the airing cupboard was. And then she said to me, "Now, I told this to my doctor and he just laughed at me." She goes, "But I know you won't laugh." She said, 6 months later, I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw coming out of that cupboard, and it was her words, and this was the early 90s, she said, a red Indian coming out of my cupboard. She goes, "I couldn't see his legs or anything. I only saw him from the chest upwards or the waist upwards." And she goes, "He had a bone necklace on and a full feathered headdress. I could even see the paint marks on his face. And he appeared to be like almost as if a swimmer might do a front doggy paddle sort of thing, like crawling with his hands as if he's struggling to get out." And she said that she could see another person behind him, but he was in shadow or silhouette. And she said she thought a third person behind that one, possibly wearing a hat, but again, he was in silhouette. And so, but she said she could quite clearly see this Red Indian, or we might call him a Native American Indian, or people of the First Nations is another word that people use these days, coming out the cupboard. And she said it was happening every night. That was a weird thing. It was happening every night. She'd be waking up about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and seeing this phenomena. And she goes, "What's happening?" And I said, "Oh my God." I said, "Well," I said, "Do you know what a spirit guide is?" And she goes, "No." She'd never been to a spiritualist church or read any books of that sort of nature to influence her way of thinking, because what she was describing to me was a classic spirit guide.
That's what I was going to say. That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah. For anyone that doesn't know what a spirit guide is, basically in the world of spiritualism, that's contact with the dead through mediums. I say dead, it's a term that people are familiar with, although they're not dead, they've just dropped their body. Is that the people of the First Nations, if you like, the Native American Indians, were much more in tune with nature. And the reason is that they can come back as spirit guides or be spirit guides over there. They help people adjust to their new conditions after death because they're much more in tune with what's going on in the world, with nature and everything. They're not materialistic or anything like that. And so they would act as also a guide to seances and things. So when a seance happens, they would be what they call a doorkeeper, or the spirit guide would speak through the medium or whatever like that and say what's about to happen in the seance. And I said to this lady, I said, I bet your husband didn't believe in this kind of stuff, did he? And she goes, no, he thought it was a load of rubbish. I said, well, that's probably part of the key, is that the fact is your husband isn't developed enough to come by himself. But I said, what I believe has happened in your particular case is that the mist that you saw rise out of his body just after he passed away was possibly his spirit or soul, and it's gone through that cupboard door there, which is, I believe, acting like a revolving doorway in a hotel. You can go through it and you can come out of it. And I said, I believe that your husband is possibly the gentleman behind the spirit guide, but the spirit guide is being is trying to bring him back for you. And they're using that portal, which is the doorway.
Like a portal,
Yeah, bringing him through for you to see him, and maybe he's got something to say. And she goes, well, what do I do? What do I say to him? I said, well, try and ask him questions. And I said, if you don't get any joy, then what I would suggest is if you call 192, because obviously this was the days before the internet, but everyone used to ring 192, ring 192 and ask the College of Psychic Studies or the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, both in London, both very knowledgeable on these things, and give them a call and tell them what you've told me, and maybe they can offer some assistance. And I left it at that and then ran back to my car and drove off into the night. Yeah, quite a spooky one, that one, isn't it?
It's interesting. So you yourself are reasonably psychic, are you, Neil?
I wouldn't say I'm like Philip Kinsella. I don't.
No, Philip is really good, I know, yeah. Yeah, I've gone on to do demonstrations, in what they call open medium, platform mediumship. So basically, if a spiritualist church hasn't got a medium for the night, they'll either ask people from the audience, because they know a lot of them are sitting in what they call circles, to step up and do something, or they sometimes prearrange it, that they'll say on, this night of the month, we'll have our fledgling mediums, if you like, and it gives them an opportunity to practice their newly acquired skills on an unsuspecting audience. I hope they never ask me, because I don't think I'm psychic at all. But
well, you don't have to be psychic. No, I mean you could be the recipient of the message. You see, so yeah, I've been in many different developing circles. Some are better than others, and
I'm going to say, I mean, I have been in a couple of those circles, and I've actually had some quite amazing results that surprised me, sort of thing. But I imagine we've all got some sort of a spiritualism, psychicness within us.
I think you're right.
But
I think you're right.
I don't consider that I mean, we can all sense things, can't we? As I say on a lot of shows, we can always pick up an atmosphere in a room and things like that. And that's probably like the early stages of it, but.
Yeah, I have this feeling that people that are more kind of artistic or creative or musical in some way, using that hemisphere of their brain, they're more inclined to be on the psychic kind of thing, because they're much more using their intuition, their creativity skills, things like that. And I believe that kind of thing helps in when you sort of start to imagine things more and you start to use your creativity, it means that you're open to more ideas coming through, and that's how that they can get these things through to you. And I'd imagine people that dream and have vivid dreams are probably quite psychic as well.
Yeah. I can never remember my dreams. I don't know if you do, but
I remember them in the morning, and by tea time they've gone completely out of my mind. I mean,
apparently I dream every night, my wife says, but I don't remember any of them. Usually fighting with somebody, or the big clothes are going everywhere. Yeah. I mean, I was interviewing someone about previous lives the other night, and it came back to me that the other week that I was having a dream that I was trying to hide
from tanks and things. And I was thinking, is that something of a previous life coming through there, where maybe in a Second World War or something I was hiding from actual tanks? I don't know.
Yeah, I think another thing that fascinates me is that in sleep is that leaving the body and going out on astral travelling and things like that. How do you? I mean, I believe in it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure we all do it. But
we actually interviewed someone about that about 3 or 4 shows back in the summer, who told us.
I saw that. A lady, wasn't it? Yeah, I can't think of it.
That's right. Yeah. It's on the tip of my tongue, but it's gone. But she's a nice lady, and she's been doing that for years. And I remember talking to her about this guy called Robert Monroe, who was a pioneer in the research of out-of-body travels, because he discovered it accidentally. This was a guy who was a radio and TV, I think more of a radio producer, and initially he was trying to sort of educate himself to learn other languages, and so he thought a good idea was at the time, and this would be, I would think, around the early 1960s, but by having a tape recorder playing with headphones of someone, say, speaking French, and he would be listening to the French language as he goes to sleep. And the idea is that his subconscious will hear all these words, and sort of it'd be easier to learn the language later on, I think. I think that was his kind of hypothesis. But as a byproduct of that, he started to discover that he was getting pains in his solar plexus. I mean, he didn't call it his solar plexus, but that's where it was. And his doctor couldn't find anything wrong with him. And eventually he said that it started to get so bad that he started to feel these vibrations occurring in his body from time to time. And one particular occasion he said that he felt his hand pressing through the floor, where his arm had draped over the side of the bed where he was having a sleep. And he could push his arm, and it went straight through the floor, and he could feel what he felt was water. Oh, right. And he actually considered rolling back the carpet when he woke up and taking the floorboards up to see if there was any warp below his floorboards. But then other times, then he felt himself sort of like on the ceiling, looking down at his own body. So he actually learned after a while how to actually consciously get out of the body by rolling out of it at certain times. And he used to go on all these journeys, and hence he wrote this book called Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe, for those that want to get it. It's a classic book in the field, and he goes to these different locales, he calls them. So locale 1 was the earth plane, if you like, literally saying, I want to go see David near Rendlesham Forest, and I think of you, and then I'm there, kind of thing. But then there was other locales, that locale 2, which is like appear to be a spirit world type of place where he would see people from the afterlife. And then he had another place, Locale 3, where he said he couldn't even define what it was, but it appeared to be like an alternate Earth, where he would be on a bus. He found himself on a bus, but he tried to pay the bus driver money, and the bus driver sort of looked at him and thought, what do you mean, you know? And the bus appeared to be made of wood. So obviously it's not like from this world, is it? It's a wooden sort of bus. No. Very bizarre. And he had an alternate life there, apparently. It appeared to be him living a life of a sort of scientist in this Locale 3 sort of lifetime. He appeared to be peering through the scientist's eyes into that world and living a bit of that life by occasionally visiting it. Very interesting book for anyone that's interested in out-of-body experiences.
Robert Monroe.
Robert Monroe. He's now passed over himself, so he's a permanent resident of Locale 2. But he did give the instructions at the back of the book about how to do this technique of going out of the body. And he gave it with a warning, though. He said, this is like Pandora's box. Once you've learnt this technique, you cannot undo it. You've opened that door and you cannot shut it. And he said, I'm warning you now, if you don't want to do it, don't do it.
I must admit, in my teens, in my late teens, I did actually start trying to experiment with that. Myself through a couple of books. I don't know. When was this book written?
I believe the book came out about 1971 or 72, something like that. Right,
okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe I was a bit later than that then. Maybe it was the book I was reading. I don't know. But I can remember trying that. But I used to find I just fell asleep. So whether that, but maybe that was part of it. You do have to go to sleep anyway, and then your body sort of goes,
Yeah. I mean, my mate practiced it, and he said that it did work for him, and I think it will work better on other people, some people than others. And there is another book out by a chap, and I can't remember his name, and he actually sort of said this book is written because of my experiences of learning this technique that Robert Monroe had pioneered. And so he'd written his own book of all his own experiences. But some of it was quite interesting. He would sort of like have battles with strange astral creatures, you know. As soon as you roll out your body, you got these weird creatures floating around, which sounds a bit scary. So that put me off doing it, really. But my friend said that he had learnt the technique and actually practiced it successfully. He said on one particular occasion, he said that he floated out of his body and went shooting right up out of the earth, through the house, right up into the sky and right up into space, and he could look down at the earth from space. And then he said he found himself coming straight back down again.
Yeah, because it's sort of like a piece of elastic, apparently, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, you can't leave your body and not be able to get back to it, as I understand it.
Unless you die or something.
Well, unless you die, yeah, it's different.
Yeah. Which brings me to another interesting story that one of my fireside chats revealed a couple of years ago. I was actually at someone's birthday. We was all around the campfire because she was having her birthday party at a pub, and it was the summertime. And this lady said to me, she goes, "Oh, go on, Neil, tell us some of your ghostly stories." So I said, "Oh, okay then." So I told them a few ghostly stories. And one of the friends I didn't know of this lady's birthday it was, she said, "I'll tell you this story," but she goes, "I don't normally tell people it, but it's only because you said that." Again, it's one of these things, I only tell it to people that are open to it kind of story. And it turned out that this lady was a nurse, and she said that I believe that she might have been operating from a hospital, possibly Southampton Hospital, but it's somewhere on the west coast of England, this hospital. And she said that I know this story to be true because I know the doctor and the two medics that it happened to, and they told me it. And she said that what happened in this particular case was that they have on this particular floor of the hospital all these seriously ill patients in the hospital beds, and they're all wired up to these heart machines and monitors and bleepers and all sorts of gadgets. And if one of them flatlines, if you like, you know, their heart stops beating, it sets off an alarm or a pager of some kind of device to the doctors in the floor above. And so rather than waiting for a lift to come up, they find it's quicker to run down 2 flights of stairs and they're straight away in the room, and they go and then try and resuscitate the patient that's crashed, if you like. So on this particular occasion, she said, you know, their pagers went, a doctor and 2 medics ran down these 2 flights of stairs, and as they came down the second flight of stairs, they came across this girl sitting crouched over on the stairs, just sitting there, and they sort of said to her, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here?" And she goes, "Oh, my stomach really hurts. My stomach really hurts." And they said, "Well, you shouldn't be here. You should be in your bed. But look, we've got to go and see someone. We'll send someone to help you, okay?" And all she kept saying, "My stomach really hurts. My stomach really hurts." And so anyway, they ran into the recovery crash room, and there on the bed of this person that had just died was the very same girl that they encountered in the stairway. And she was actually dead. They couldn't retrieve her, and they'd obviously seen her spirit sitting in the stairway, and when they went back, it had gone. Now, yeah, exactly.
Another weird one, yeah.
I remember telling my mum that, and she said, "But if this girl had died, why was she in such pain?" And I said, "Well, I think my theory is that we talk about the astral body, if you like, and supposedly it's attached by an astral cord. Some people have said they've seen it when they've gone out of their body. Some people say it connects to the third eye in the head. Other people say it connects more to where your navel is, back to the astral body, a bit like an umbilical cord." And the theory is, again, I've never done this myself, but the theory or the thinking behind it is that this cord will stretch, if you like elastic, and it even says in the Bible, "Does the silver cord break?" or something like that. It says that when that breaks, that's the point of death. And I wonder if, and it's pure speculation, but I wonder if this girl had snapped her silver cord, if you like, or her astral cord, and the pain that she was feeling was around her astral stomach, if you like, but because she was still operating to a certain level within our reality, she felt the pain of this reality. And that's why the doctors could see her. Now, there's a bit of a kind of science to this, if you like, or hypothetical science, I should say, that she was in the stairway, which is like a box-like construction. And I mentioned earlier about the spirit guide, the Indian spirit guide, coming through that cupboard like a portal, again, another box-like construction. And I have a theory about doorways, because most of the sightings to do with ghosts and spirits and afterlife residents, they tend to occur with them either standing near a door or in a doorway. And when you speak to a medium who can do what they call physical mediumship, they have a cabinet which they would sometimes sit in, and especially in Victorian times, they don't use them so much, but there are physical mediums out there that do have these cabinets. But these days they use like a canopy or a tent-like structure. And one of the mediums I met actually used what you would think is a toilet tent that you go camping with, because he said it was a perfect kind of structure that he needed for physical mediumship. So he showed it to me, and it was in his spare room. And I said, so why do you use these cabinets? What's the purpose? And he said, well, it helps build up the energy, the psychic energy, by enclosing it in this cabinet. And then when the medium or the phenomena, if you like, or the materialized spirit is ready to come out, this canopy will open out and this physical being will step through it or out of it. And spirit guides or loved ones have been known to step out of these spirit cabinets in a seance room, normally in infrared light, not always, and they'll walk around and be touched by people, even have their pulses felt by people. So my thinking is that this particular girl, she was in that situation where this stairwell was acting like a spirit cabinet or a materialization cabinet, and it focused her energy a little bit. And again, with the spirit guide coming through the doorway in the cupboard, that was acting as a spirit cabinet as well. And I tell people it's a bit like a television set, where in the old days, before we had these great big flat screen TVs, we'd have a great big square box that you stick in the corner of the room, and inside of that was the valve or the tube that fire a photon at the screen in a vacuum, and it would trace across the screen 50 times a second and build up an image. Now, if you didn't have the sides of that TV, that photon would fly up into space and you'd never see it. So the sides of the TV actually contain that image by holding it in place, if you like, and it gets to draw an image across the screen 50 times a second or 50 hertz a second, and that's how your image builds up. Now, I'm wondering, that's more of an analogy, if you like, but I'm wondering if spirits need like this construction, as my medium friend explained to me, to build up that energy to contain it. Again, another analogy to that would be that if you're going to make some cakes, say, you'd mix up your cake mix, put them in a baking tray, then put it in the oven. Now, you don't leave the oven door open. You have to shut the oven door to build that heat up in it. And it's only when that heat gets to a certain temperature does the liquid state of that cake mix then change into more of a solid mass. So that's when you can take them out of the oven. So I think that these toilet tents or these spirit cabinets are acting in that kind of thing. They help contain the energy of a spirit till it's ready to manifest in the physical world.
It's interesting. It could also act as to stop any interference from outside, like taking your senses. So you're just focused, aren't you, on what's in front of you, rather than what's around you, maybe.
That's right. So when the medium sits inside, they're often blindfolded. They're often having their mouth taped up. They're often strapped to a chair in some way or form. So that the idea of that is that the skeptics, if there are any there, will say, well, look, there's no way I'm in the world. I'm faking this because I'm all strapped up, tied up, taped up, and everything. I can't move, and so this is how they rule out the idea that it's the actual medium themselves supposedly walking around the seance room as a spirit. But there has been cases, and they were actually caught out, where there was a fraudulent case of mediumship about 5 years ago, maybe, where this guy, I think he is in Australia, but he originates from the UK, called Gary Mannion, I believe. His name's out in the public, so I'm not sort of like suddenly disclosing it. Has been caught at this infrared camera where he's walking around in the dark, touching people, and they believe it's spirit. You see.
Well, I think a lot of that used to go back in the old days, the old Edwardian and Georgian days, didn't it, when they did all this sort of stuff?
Well, that's it. It was open to fakery then. I mean, if you look back at the photographs they used to forward with cotton wool and all sorts of things, But
then you do see some other photographs and you think, what the hell, don't you? I mean, I've seen some amazing ones. So whether they're all faked, I don't know. But I say
well, yeah. I mean, with the technology, unfortunately, it's just like the UFO phenomenon. With the better the technology we got for doing these things, the more it can be faked with things like Photoshop.
Oh, certainly today, so easy. I mean, such a lot of the UFO stuff you said is absolute rubbish. I mean, I would say sort of 98% of it is probably faked or mistaken.
Yeah, and people ask me if I ever seen a ghost, and I have to put my hand up and say, well, no, I haven't, not to my conscious knowledge. I think I've seen maybe the lower half of a ghost, again standing in a doorway, but it appeared to be, no, not the lower half, was it? Yeah, I think it was the lower half. I remember the trousers being rather baggy. I could see a top part of the body, but not see the head, but it was trying to talk to me, and I was half asleep, and it was trying to say something. I just couldn't understand what it was saying, but it was standing right in the doorway. But whether that was me dreaming awake or not, I don't know.
Yeah, that's always the problem, isn't it? It's,
Yeah. Oh, I'll tell you a scary story, though, if you want a scary story, as it's Halloween. I've been reunited with a friend of mine from many years ago. I used to work with her some years ago. I was about 16 and she was about 32 at the time. And so this year I've been reunited with her, and I've been helping her with her 70th birthday party. I did a little bit of video filming for her and whatnot. So I've been going around there delivering DVDs. We've been having a catch up and a cup of tea, and I've told about my interests and stuff like that, and where they've gone over these intervening years. And she said, oh, I've seen a ghost once. I said, oh, what's that then? And she said, well, I was quite young. I think she was about 18 or 19. But her and her family had gone on holiday, I think it was to Devon, she said. And what happened, she had this bedroom by herself that looked out towards the sea. And so she'd gone to sleep in this bed, and there was a chair that was down in the hallway of this old house, but she said she woke up in the middle of the night, and this chair wasn't in the hallway, but it was suddenly in the bedroom where she was. And she said she saw this old woman sitting in the chair, but her head back, as if she had nodded off back to sleep with her head back. And she recognised it. She thought it was her gran that had died years ago. And she thought, oh my God, it's Gran, and she's sitting in this chair but with her head back. And she was a bit spooked out by it. So, of course, what you do is you turn over and put your head under the blankets and shut your eyes and just hope that it'll go away. So that's what she did do. She hoped it would go away by turning over, shutting her eyes, and eventually she fell asleep. And she said she woke up a few hours later and she could see the window at the end of the bed, and she said she could just see the first stages of the twilight light of the dawn coming through the window. She thought, oh, it's getting lighter now. And then she remembered about this ghostly lady that she had seen, who she thought was her gran. And so she looked across to where it was, and it was still there. Wow. Hours later, but this time it was sitting forward and the head was bowed over. Wow. And she thought, oh my God, it's still there. And she said this mist suddenly came over it, and then it just dissipated and vanished into nothing.
Wow, that is a weird one.
Yeah, it's quite a scary one. I mean, it's not often you see a ghost twice, is it?
No,
you know,
that's right.
Especially a few hours later. My God, that certainly put the EBGs up me.
I'll tell you, I wanted to talk to you about, you did a little show a little while ago with these about creatures on the moon. What was all that about?
Oh, aliens on the moon.
Aliens on the moon. Is that what it was? Because I actually haven't had a chance to listen to that show yet.
Now, it's a talk I do. It's hard to do on the radio, but we were talking to Ananda Sirasena,
right,
who is actually coming to High Wycombe at the end of this month, the end of October, that is, to do a talk on, I forget the title now. I've actually done the little Photoshop images of it tonight. But he's going to be talking about structures on Mars and structures on the moon. And so it tied in quite nicely with my talk, Aliens on the Moon, where I've been looking into a lot of the claims that go out over the internet, whether there's aliens on the moon or structures and things like that.
To me, it's not impossible. I mean, I've heard quite a bit about it as well. You know, whether it's actually true, I mean, I tend to believe it's not impossible, so...
Well, that's it, because we're open-minded, you see. But I put an ad out for my talk, Aliens on the Moon, into High Wycombe's Facebook group, High Wycombe being the town that this talk would take place in. And so this is just being publicised to the general public, and God, blimey, the negative comments that come back. And this bloke says, I'm an astronomer, and I've met Patrick Moore, and blah, blah, blah. And if there were aliens on the moon, I think I'd be the first to know about it. And I thought, God, how conceited can you get, you know?
Yeah.
And other people said, oh yes, aliens on the moon, that talk will last about 3 seconds, end of, you know. And I thought, God, these people are so close-minded. But, yeah, no, I agree. I'm open-minded about it. There's a lot of rubbish out there on the internet with fake videos of spaceships leaving the moon, and all sorts of things like that. But I think one of the strongest pieces of evidence in my mind was the guy called Carl Wolf, Sergeant Carl Wolf, who died last year, who was a kind of airman, and he was like a technician working at Langley, Virginia, where he was called in to go and fix a piece of equipment that was causing a bottleneck in all their data that it was receiving from one of these lunar orbiters in the mid-60s. And he said that the building where he was called to go into, he had to have special security clearance to go in there because the guy that normally did this job had to go off sick or something. And so he saw the building, it said NSA, and he somehow thought that was NASA. But in fact, it's only years later he realized it's the National Security Agency. So he went in there and he said that what surprised him was that there's all these very international scientists there. And he thought, if this is NASA or the NSA, you know, you'd have presumably just Americans walking around there, but everyone was all international there. So he said that he went into this particular building where they were doing it, into the room, and he said, I can't fix this piece of equipment here because it's too dark in this room, obviously if you're developing the film and whatnot, so it's going to have to be wheeled out. So they had to go and call some technicians to come and get it, and whilst he was in this room, he got chatting to this young man who was helping with the downloading of images from the lunar orbiter, and he was explaining the technology of how it all reached their building from orbiting the moon, and he was showing them all the photographs and how they put them together and stuff like that. And he said after half an hour, he says, oh, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And he said at that particular point, it really kind of frightened him, and he thought, this bloke's broken security protocol here, he shouldn't be telling me this. But he showed him all these photographs of, like he said, mushroom-like structures or spheres on the moon, definite structures, but some like mushroom-type buildings and dish-shaped buildings and things like that. And so he went away, and he said someone came in the room and they quickly stopped what they were talking about, but he went away thinking, oh, I'll hear about this on the 6 o'clock news. And of course he never did, but he actually said that at the Disclosure Project back in 2001.
Well, I mean, because we have heard that astronauts have seen some strange things going around the moon, haven't they? Whether there's actually truth in it, I mean, I've heard that even on the first moon landings, there's rumours that they saw something, because they had two different feedbacks, didn't they? Downloads for the military one and also the public one, and they used to switch between the two. Yeah,
a military channel and a medical channel or something like that, supposedly on these radios. I'm not so sure about, as you know, I'm not so sure the moon landings happened in the way that we're led to believe.
We're not going to go into that, but I know.
Yeah, but so my thinking on that one is that it would be a bit of a red herring for that extra information. Say, oh yes, they definitely saw aliens on the moon, so therefore you kind of think, oh, they obviously went to the moon then, but they don't tell anyone they saw aliens on the moon. But the logical thing about aliens on the moon in my mind is that if, for instance, the United States would have a base out in Afghanistan or Iraq, because it's easier to have a military establishment there, to keep an eye on the situation out there. And so, when I say aliens on the moon, I'm not suggesting these aliens come from the moon and they grew up there. What I'm suggesting is they have a base there to keep maybe an eye on us.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if they were going to put a base for the moon, they know we've got telescopes, so they would put it on the far side.
Exactly.
That would make sense.
Yeah, exactly. It does make sense, yeah.
But as far as it goes, we're not going to go into an argument, but I believe we went to the moon. I mean, I was actually doing electronics for a lot of the equipment that was being used back then. And I know for a fact that we did have the technology to do, if you see the stuff I was working on in the late 60s, you'd be quite amazed.
My dad ended up working for Marconi, funny
enough. That's how I started out at
Marconi. I think he worked for Marconi Underwater Systems. Right. And I know they had different divisions, didn't they?
Yeah. Marconi Elliott, avionics, I think I started out.
Right, okay.
And then I left and did the rounds, all different companies and things, and ended up going back there. and ended up working on the AC-130 project. But yeah, I do. Well, I mean, I can't guarantee it, but I do actually believe they did go. Seeing by the equipment that I worked on, and also.
This is very.
And I say, I went to Houston. I had a VIP trip around Houston Space Center a few years back, and some of the equipment that's there, you can see all the control, mission control and all that, where they're used to actually speak to the astronauts and all that. It was, to actually put all that together and keep it all a secret, there's so many people involved, you can't, I just can't see that they could cover that up. And also, sorry, to interrupt you again.
Go on.
But don't you think the Chinese and the Russians would love to blow that whistle to say that the Americans didn't go to the moon?
Yeah, but all those arguments, and I understand they're very common arguments, but all those arguments have been defended by the people that believe that we didn't go. I mean, they don't tell 400,000 people, by the way, here's a secret we want you to keep. They just don't tell them.
Oh, no, yeah.
And the Russians and the Chinese and things like that, well, because they had their own secrets they wanted to keep, they didn't, and the Americans probably knew half of their secrets they didn't want to expose. So it's a case of, supposedly, from what I understand, that Yuri Gagarin wasn't the first man in space. It was another chap, but, Yuri Gagarin was like the third or fourth man in space, but the other guys didn't come back alive. And so
that's possible.
They kept it quiet, you see. Very interesting book by Mary Bennett and David Percy that mentions all this sort of stuff. And, but anyway, it's a completely different area.
It sort of goes into the science area, doesn't it, rather than sort of paranormal.
What you've said has reminded me, talking about your avionics history, I met a guy where I did a talk once, and he asked me a very interesting question. He says, do ghosts come in different shapes and sizes? And I said, well, what do you mean exactly? And he says, well, back in the early 70s, I worked at a kind of hush-hush MOD establishment. And I'd imagine it's the way he described it, it was something like one of these kind of like stately homes that they had taken control of and converted into a research laboratory of some sort. And he said that we were working back then on what you would think today is a silicon chip, but we didn't call it that then. And he said, I was working on one side of this room, with a load of bits of kit and stuff. And he said, my colleague was on the other side of the room. He said, and suddenly the whole room was lit up blue in colour with a blue light. And they thought, what the hell's that? And they both looked round. And he said, between them, hovering that had just come into the room, was this blue glowing square box, about the size of a shoebox, but it was glowing bright blue. And it hovered and went between them. And it went up the room, and then it went through the other door and turned right and went down a corridor. And they just stood there absolutely gobsmacked. Yeah. And so they thought, crikey, exactly. So they went and found their boss, and they said, we've just seen this blue glowing box floating down the room. And the boss says to them, come with me. And so they followed the boss, and they went down into the sort of depths basement or whatever, where this old boy that had been working there for years worked. And he said, tell this guy here what you've just seen. So they said, well, we've just seen this blue glowing box. And this old boy said, yeah, I've seen it too. So whatever this blue box was, had been making regular, repeated appearances at this MOD establishment, presumably in the 1960s, maybe even after. But it almost suggests to me, and he wondered if was it a ghost? And I said, no, I don't think it's a ghost in the way that we would think of ghosts and spirits. I said, to me, that sounds more like a reconnaissance kind of device, maybe used by aliens or UFOs or something.
Or interdimensional beings of some sort. Yeah, coming through.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really interesting. I mean, I've not seen anything like that. I have seen a UFO back in the late 60s, which I've told the story so many times now. But yeah, that is really interesting, that one. Well,
yeah. It reminded me of a story that was, in fact, I think I met her some years later. The lady that runs Beams International, I forget her name now, but Hillary.
Yeah.
Hillary.
Right.
Yeah. She said that she was the lady that reported it because she used to work as a technical illustrator stroke draftsman and it could have been the very same establishment, I don't know, but I remember it was repeated, this story of hers, in Timothy Good's book, where a security guard was going round one of these old stately homes, which is, used by the MOD for whatever. And, he said, again, he could see a blue light coming from a room. So the security guard went in and he said he saw this man that was glowing blue. But he appeared to have he would say it was a space helmet or something that was glowing blue. And he appeared to be thumbing through one of the filing cabinets trying to grab some papers. And this guy was obviously shocked to see him. This man just disappeared before his eyes. And this poor security guard was so shocked that he literally had to be taken off and, taken to the funny farm, as some people might call it. And apparently, all military police and Secret Service and all sorts of people were there the next day. And it was Hillary, who runs Beams International, who worked there in the drafting office or drawing office or something at the time. She overheard the conversation between one of her bosses and a man that was there. And he apparently said to these visiting security people, he said, no matter what we do, or no matter how we try to stop them, they always get in here. Whatever they are, they can't seem to stop them.
Oh. Well, I mean, I'm sure the powers that be know a lot more about all this stuff than they let on anyway. I'm not talking about the normal people at the top in our sort of political parties. I'm talking about people way above, above them sort of thing. I'm sure there are secret governments and things that know more about everything that goes on. But
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Anyway, we've gone to about an hour and a quarter. I think we've better draw a line under that, Neil. And
okay.
But that was a very interesting show. I mean, you'll have to come back on again with some more stories at some point.
Yeah. Oh, I've got a load more.
I know you have.
Yeah, but, no problem, David.
That was fantastic. Problem. I really enjoyed that. Anyway, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that? I know you've got your own show on the network anyway, but which I'll put a link to.
Thank you.
Page.
Well, we do have the Paranormal Peep Show, which runs once a month on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and we do have a Facebook page for that, the Paranormal Peep Show. I do have my own art website if people want to take a look at that, which is neilgeddesward.co.uk. I'll send you a link for that, and people can email me if they got any stories to tell me. Put subject paranormal so it doesn't get, deleted accidentally. And they can email me at
I'll put it through me
Neil.
and I'll have it first.
Yeah. So you see it first and write your own book. Neil, Neil, at Geddes Ward, GEDDESWARD.co.uk.
Excellent.
Okay.
And I've seen some of your artwork. It's brilliant. I really would recommend somebody go and have a look at it because it is really, really good stuff.
Thank you very much.
Really worth a visit. Anyway, Neil, thank you very much. It was a great show. Very interesting. Good luck with your show for the future. You got any good guests coming along?
Well, we just talked to one of the other people on the network about reincarnation. So he's coming up in let me think, probably end of November for that guest, and we've got another lady coming on at the end of October, talking about the Syrians, the message from the Syrians, Sirius star system. I forget her name now. I did a poster last night, but the name escapes me at the top of my head.
I know, it's the trouble. You have to remember so many names, don't we, nowadays?
It's, it's hard to keep up with all these different contactees and things.
I need to do a show on reincarnation, actually, because I don't think I've touched much on that with some of my shows. I mean, most of my shows have been sort of like UFO orientated, but it just seems to be the way that goes. I don't know why, but so I do like to try and vary it a little bit. Because
I think we cover most things as much as we can on the Peep Show, reincarnation, UFOs, and all sorts of things if we can.
Yeah, what interests you from last week? I had Kaz on, Kaz Rooney on. She's I don't know if you know that name. But,
no, I don't know.
Yeah, she's actually into paganism and everything like that. So perhaps you'll catch that show next Monday.
Oh, I'll listen out for it then.
Kaz Rooney.
Thank you. I'll listen out for that.
But your show will go out on the 21st. So when you're listening to this, it's today.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, right, and Neil, I'll say good night to you now, and thanks for coming on, and thanks for listening out there. And if you want to say goodbye, Neil, to everybody, and
I will indeed. Thank you very much for having me, and have a happy Halloween, everybody.
Yeah, that's great. Looking forward to that one, aren't we? Although then after that we got Christmas, and then we got all the snow and the cold weather, and then, anyway, that goes with it. But anyway,
Yeah.
Anyway, cheers, Neil. Speak to you soon. Take care, mate.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Thank
then.
you.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm David Young, Paranormal Dimensions. Goodbye, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye. Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.